Greetings, fellow book lovers, and welcome back to Colin's Corner. Today, we are going to be talking about my top reads from last year. But first, I will be revealing the answer to last video's Comedy with Colin. This is going to be a new segment on the channel where I read a joke, a pun, or a riddle to you guys at the end of the video, and then reveal the answer in my next video. So stick around till the end of today's video to hear the next Comedy with Colin. Last video, the question was, why are tightrope walkers so healthy? The answer? Because they eat a balanced diet. Alright, with that out of the way, let's move on to the main show. Now, these books on this list were all first-time reads for me in 2022. I did try to keep it to one book per author, with the exception of one author, which you guys will find out shortly. It is not ranked. These were just kind of my favorite reads overall from last year. Without anything further, guys, let's get into this list. Book number one on this list is going to be Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Now, this book is an alternate history novel set in the early 1800s in England, where in the book, magic was thought to have been dead for a couple of hundred years now. We follow Gilbert Norrell and Jonathan Strange. Mr. Norrell actually ends up being revealed as a true magician and is brought to the spotlight after proving his worth to a club of theoretical magicians. Because magic was dead, they had this club of theoretical magicians. Once Norrell's popularity kind of grows throughout England, Jonathan Strange, who is another magician in England, seeks him out to try to learn from him. They end up joining forces together and then join forces with the government to fight in the Napoleonic War against France. This was an amazingly thought out book with incredible depth, a lot of footnotes. That were used to build the backstories of many of the characters and to build a lot of intrigue. There's a lot of dry humor in this. It's very witty. Susanna Clarke is clearly very intelligent. However, with that being said, the book doesn't feel highbrow or anything. It's got a light tone to it, a very sarcastic kind of tone to it. It is a chunky book, but it's definitely worth a read, in my opinion. Alright, the second book, guys, is going to be The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. This is the only non-fiction book on this list, and I actually had to read this one for a college writing class over the summer last year. This book tells the story of how HeLa cells came into existence. Now, anyone that's in the medical field, or if you're not, may know of HeLa cells, but for many years people didn't. This book tells the story of how a poor black woman named Henrietta Lacks changed the course of medical history forever when she died of cervical cancer, and her cells were discovered to have been able to be reproduced in a lab under the correct conditions and therefore used for tests on different diseases. Scientists have been trying to get cells to reproduce in culture for many years, but this was the first time they were successful with it. Her cells were used in helping to find a cure for AIDS, polio, develop different cancer treatments. The problem was that her cells were biopsied without her or her family's consent. So what Skloot does in this book is she reveals the repercussions of that for her surviving family members, for Henrietta's surviving family members, and the medical field in general. I thought it was very compelling. It was extremely revealing, and it was emotional at times. So if you guys are in the mood for a nonfiction read, or this sounds like something you'd be interested in, definitely give this one a try. Alright guys, for book number 3, we have, boom, The Stand by Stephen King. This is an absolutely epic story in every sense of the word. In the beginning, a pandemic is breaking out with the Captain Trips super flu, which has a 99% fatality rate. Those that are immune start to band together to fight against King's arguably most notorious villain. If you're a movie watcher, that would probably be Pennywise would be my guess, but if you're a constant reader, I think the general consensus would probably be that Randall Flagg is King's most notorious villain. This is a story about people coming together in the face of disaster, about the degradation of society and the animalistic nature of humans coming to the surface. You know, sides are chosen. There's a battle between good and evil with plenty of morally gray sprinkled throughout. Did I mention there's an animal companion? This book had me standing up and pacing while reading. It brought tears to my eyes. It had me screaming in anger and cheering with joy. This one is definitely a King classic for a reason, and I definitely plan on rereading this one at some point. Alright, the fourth book, guys, is going to be Wizard and Glass, the fourth Dark Tower book. Now, this is going to be the only repeat author, and the reason for that is because this list was a little difficult for me to make, because last year was the year of King for me. I read a ton of King. I finished the entire Dark Tower series and a bunch of his other works, and this was my favorite Dark Tower book. So for those that don't know, the Dark Tower series is King's attempt at epic fantasy. It is his magnum opus, as it is technically an 8-book series now with The Wind Through the Keyhole. So I won't talk too much about this as it is the fourth book in the series, but what this book does is it furthers the main storyline a little bit, and then the bulk of this book is actually a flashback to an earlier time in our main character, Roland Deschain's life. We learn more about why Roland is the way that he is. So it got me emotionally attached to a character that I was already very interested in and intrigued by, but that I really didn't know much about. This book had everything in it. And I would like to talk some Dark Tower on the channel at some point. If you haven't read it yet, it starts with the Gunslinger, the first book, and it is by far the wildest ride that a series has ever taken me on. Alright guys, book number 5 is Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough. This is a psychological thriller. It's extremely tough to talk about this genre without giving anything away, but I'm going to try. Our main character in this one, her name is Louise. She is a single mom. She's in a bit of a rut, and she finally meets a man out at a bar and feels good about it. But he happens to be married. And when she goes to work the next day, he also happens to be her new boss. So that's basically all I can say about this without giving too much away. But it is safe to say that things get very interesting very quickly after this first series of events happens. This book had the best plot twist I've ever read in a thriller before, bar none. I genuinely thought that I had it figured out and still thought it was a good twist, and then my mind was absolutely blown. So this one is a little bit off-brand for me, but if you want an extremely fast reading book in between some larger fantasy books, slide this one in sometime because you're not going to regret it. Alright guys, for book number 6, we have Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. I believe I'm in the minority in this, in that Assassin's Quest is my favorite book in the Farseer trilogy. At least on my first read through it was, because like I said in my 5 series to read or continue in 2023 video, I am rereading Farseer on audio right now, and I'm on Royal Assassin, which is the second book. But on my first read through, Assassin's Quest was my favorite. This is another one that I can't say too much about because it is the third book in a trilogy. But what I did enjoy about this book and why it was my favorite was I really enjoyed the new characters that were introduced to us in Assassin's Quest. I also thought it was an amazing end to a trilogy. Some storylines were wrapped up, but honestly, so many more questions were generated, and it got me extremely excited to learn more about the Six Duchies in general. And also, this book solidified Fitz as one of my favorite characters that I've ever read. So it makes me want to skip directly to the next Fitz series because I know in LiveShip we aren't following Fitz, but I wouldn't want to upset the likes of Scott over at the Bald Booktuber or Derry at Derry's Read It Before, who both believe that reading in publication order, at least for the Realm of the Elderlings, is the way to do it. If you guys haven't checked their channels out, please do yourselves a favor. They are fantastic content creators and both very knowledgeable about the Realm of the Elderlings. So if you've been waiting for your nudge to read Hobb, this is it. Go and buy the Farseer trilogy. Alright, for our 7th book, we have The Fellowship of the Ring. What can I say about this that hasn't already been said for decades? It was so cool to see this journey come together. I enjoyed every minute of it, from the descriptions of the landscapes to the day-to-day life events of the hobbits and the other characters. Seeing how different groups of people came together in the face of outright evil was really powerful and really inspiring. The Fellowship is not my favorite in the trilogy, but it was my favorite one that I read last year. If you are one of the few, like I was, that have not yet read this series and you're a fan of fantasy, please, please do yourselves a favor. And like I said in my most influential reads video, I highly recommend consuming this in accompaniment with Andy Serkis's audiobook narration. So read it alongside listening to his narration. It made this experience so awesome, in my opinion. Last but not least, guys, we have A Game of Thrones. Yeah, A Game of Thrones, Book 1 of A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. This book introduced us to an immense amount of characters and families and regions of Westeros and beyond. There's so much history and lore that's hinted at in just this first book. We learn why certain families have allegiances and why certain families are at each other's throats. We're following all these different plot threads that are happening in different areas of Westeros, and I'm sitting there wondering how in the heck these are going to converge and what the fallout is going to be when that happens. I've never had to tell myself not to get attached to a character more than in this book because of what happens to one very important character that I just kind of assumed was going to be around for the long haul. And oh my, does Martin have a talent for cliffhangers. And not just at the end of the book, but I'm talking chapter to chapter. He's a master at getting me to turn the next page and just continue to want to live in his world. Alright guys, that completes my list of my favorite reads from 2022. Now, on to everybody's favorite part of the video, Comedy with Colin. This week's joke, guys, is going to be, when does a joke become a dad joke? If you think you know the answer, drop your guess down below, and I will reveal the answer in my next video. Also, let me know what your guys' favorite reads were last year, and let's talk about them in the comments. If you're enjoying the content, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so we can get the word out and build this awesome community that we already have building. And remember, you are always welcome in Colin's Corner.